It is Thursday, December 21st, 2017, and this is the MMA Beat. Welcome, everyone. My name is Luke Thomas of MMAfighting.com as well as SiriusXM. I will be your host, temporary, for the day on this very last episode of the MMA Beat for all of 2017. Can you believe that? And here to help me break it all down, you know these two, the man in the shirt from the Washington Post, Jeff Wagenheim, and at the very end, the man in the hat from MMAfighting.com, as well as the ringer, Chuck Mindenhall. Now, it should be noted there is obviously one panelist missing today. Ariel Helwani is away. Yes, I forgot.
In the tropics.
I almost botched his name. I'm like, who's he again? But here's the thing. We didn't want to do the last show of the year without him. But if you know Ariel, he's got one constant mantra, which is, number one, he loves the Nationals. And number two, he'd rather the show just go on. I think that's a fair assessment of what he likes to do. So we said, you know what? We're going to save our year-end awards for after the first episode of the new year. We'll do that then. But today, we're going to look back on the year that was, the week that was, the topics that are here on the show today.
That's smart, though, because we always get that end of the year card, always has something go off on it.
I know. Everyone, look, I don't mind the awards early, but you just never know. You never know. So we're going to do that when we come back in the new year. Thank you guys so much for watching this whole year and, of course, for today as well. We really, really appreciate it. Okay, so let's get this going, right? I am ready to put this story to bed, and it just won't die. Now, here's my promise to the viewers today. We are going to talk about Mayweather. That's the bad news. The good news is we're going to talk about it quickly. I promise to make this as brief as we can possibly do it. But let's get into it, Jeff. I will pitch it to you first. Now, this story, we already sort of know how it concludes, but do me a favor. Let's go up to the point before Mayweather responded, where we're in a news cycle, and Dana White is telling ESPN that they're at least in sort of, what do you want to call it, preliminary stages or some sort of line of communication with Floyd Mayweather to fight in the UFC. When you heard that, what was your reaction?
You know, my reaction was very minimal. I saw a lot of people get really charged up on Twitter, and I was like, to me, you know, we talk every week about how the UFC's new business model is all about, you know, not making the important fights in terms of meritocracy, but just making the money fights, and I hate when that happens when it's fighters who really matter, when you know, with somebody who's a champion or somebody who's a #1 contender, you know, one of those people gets involved in these money fights that don't really mean anything for that particular weight class. Here's a money fight that has no meaning at all, and so I'd be like, fine, bring it on. You know, put him in there against, you know, make as much money as you can. It doesn't. I mean, if it had been a McGregor, then I would have the whole other, I'd be spinning, well, he's got to drop his belt because he wouldn't be defending. But if it was just, they wanted to bring him in there, I saw our friend Mike Chiappetta tweeted out, let's just throw him in there against CM Punk. That would make a lot of money. I would be totally fine with that. I really don't care about it. I don't get charged up.
Chuck, did you get charged up?
My reaction was how stupid, you know. I mean, the bottom line is, like, you look at somebody like Floyd Mayweather, he's 40 years old. I remember the James Toney thing. I hate to make even the parallel, but James Toney was 42. He just turned 42 when he fought Couture at 118. It was just such a stupid thing because it was like the UFC was trying to prove, like, hey, a boxer wants to come over here. We're going to put him against Randy Couture. He's going to take him down. And he's going to beat him on the ground. It's exactly what happened. Everybody kind of foretold that was going to happen. At 40 years old, I don't care where Floyd Mayweather is as a boxer. It doesn't matter. He has no ground game. There's no way that he can compete with the UFC fighter or UFC truly caliber fighter, like in our old sense of what that means. I saw him later. I know that you're talking about when Dana's saying this, but I saw him later basically saying, I could make $1 billion. And I'm like, no, you can't. You cannot make $1 billion in this sport. You just can't do it because one fight is all it's going to take for it to look completely meaningless. You'll be done. You will not be fighting in MMA again. So if they're going to do a big money grab, if that's really what they want to do, better hinge it all on that one fight, and they better be creative in how they book that thing.
Let me tell you why I got charged up. Number one, just the mere notion that he would even compete in the octagon seemed like they were trolling us, and maybe to an extent they actually were. But here's what bothered me. I know that McGregor fought Mayweather in a boxing contest, but the UFC was party to that for a number of reasons, and they made money from it. To me, that they would reflexively go back to that well, that was in August, we're now in December, that quickly, that is what shocked me. Because if you look at what it was, a UFC 118 where Tony and Couture fought, right thereafter, they did Velasquez-Lesnar at, 121? But it was several, I mean, they didn't go back to that freak show well for quite some time. That they would be that quick on the turnaround, I got to be honest, that terrified me. It absolutely terrified me that they are this willing to go to gimmicks that fast again.
Yeah, I guess I was a a little surprised that Dana White would have, you know, gone all in on this kind of thing. That's one thing. I kind of, the fact that they might have thought about doing it was one thing, but for him to then kind of, I mean, he was being interviewed by Brett Okamoto from ESPN, and he was kind of like almost acting like, what are you, crazy? Of course we're going to go do this. And that part of it was a little bit odd. But again, I'll just, you know, it's kind of immaterial. I mean, I kind of feel like if he were to come in and fight in the UFC, first of all, he's not the you know, boxers obviously would be at a huge disadvantage, you know, fighting MMA. But the guy who would have a chance would be the knockout artist. You put a guy who's a knockout artist, he has a shot. Floyd's not a knockout artist, so he would be like, he would be in more grave danger than any other boxer. But you know.
It's like a deep reverie. You know, it's like this whole year has been this daydream that just keeps drifting off in these ways. I'm like, you know, we went through the process at the beginning of this year of basically, I think most of us would have thought that Mayweather-McGregor would never happen. You enter the year, you're like, that's just fantasy. Why do we even bother talking about it? Well, they get to the point where they break down those barriers and it happens. I think that you got the one-off novelty effect where, like, people got kind of what they wanted from it. The boxing side, the MMA side, doesn't matter. Some people looked at it as a circus. Some people saw it, like, for its merits. But it happened, you know, and it's no more. But now you're going to go back to that same well, like you were mentioning, and I find it so fast. And to me, coming out of it, as time goes on, it seems a little worse. I think it's mostly because I think we're waiting for McGregor to basically come back and fight in MMA again. He just hasn't fought this year in MMA, so it's like there's that part of it. But then there's like the whole, we just did the whole Mayweather shtick. I don't feel like there's a fan sentiment to see him come over, to be honest. Like, I know that people will tune in.
Here's my problem with that. I mean, among MMA fans, I don't know, but this is also what scared about me. Number one was the turnaround speed on this.
Yeah.
From August to December, you're ready to go back to this. And number two, I think the issue is Conor flirting with that notion of fighting Pacquiao, or at least Pacquiao flirting with the notion of fighting Conor. All of a sudden, whoop, big notion. Mayweather, let's be clear about this. Whether he fought at bantamweight or he fought at featherweight, there is nobody on the UFC roster I would favor him over. Yeah. Not one person. Not a donk from the Latin America Tough Series, nothing. Right. He can't beat any of those guys, probably. So to me, that you have this quick turnaround, and now, I kind of lost my train of thought here for just a little bit, but I'm just sort of pointing out that to me, what does it tell us about the priority of matchmaking? We already knew that they had this trend, right, but now it appears to be like in hyperdrive.
Well, I think that people are... See, we used to always talk about with pay-per-views, there was a core audience. What was it? We set a number like 150,000, we're going to buy it no matter what, you know? Yep. This core audience, I think, is desperate to get back to something resembling the way it was. They want the people who are coming up the chain to get their chances, and they want to see fights like that where the two heads of momentum are going to clash, and that's the fight you get. Because to me, that was the UFC. It was the best of the best, always working toward each other, always cannibalizing each other toward the top. You know what I mean? This was the way it worked. This new model, you know, keep introducing Mayweather into the picture, or, you know, like we get a guy like McGregor who moonlights over in boxing, and it just keeps going off the rails. He doesn't defend his belt. It keeps taking it so far from the main road that we're used to. It just feels wrong.
What scares me, sorry, just to go back to the point as I trended off, what scares me is just how easily receptive everyone was to it. There might have been some revulsion about the Malignaggi crossover, although that probably would have done quite well. But that people, I thought after August, people would be like, okay, goodbye to all that. And that's really not what the appetite appears to be.
Yeah, well, MMA fans got a little bit of comeuppance when McGregor went in there and boxed Mayweather, and you know, basically got taken out. And I think most of us who have followed the sport seriously expected probably McGregor did better than I thought he would do, and I don't think he did that well, but I thought he did better than I expected. Mm-hmm. But there were a lot of people. There were some people, even some people in the media covering MMA, who thought, oh yeah, Conor's going to go in there and just change the world, and there was a little bit of like comeuppance for MMA fans. So this would be the way to come back. Now you get this guy coming into the cage and take him out. The thing that really got me was a little bit of the reaction. I thought, you know, Tyron Woodley coming out and say, I'll train him to fight in the MMA world. I thought that was kind of cool. And then also Demetrius Johnson tweeting out the picture of himself with all his belts. And to me, that would be the most amazing fight if I'm Dana White. I don't want Conor McGregor in there. I want Demetrius Johnson in there, because I want my guy who's who's like 20, 25, 30 pounds lighter than Mayweather to get in there and beat the crap out of him. That would be kind of fool, because of course McGregor's going to do it, and of course Demetrius is going to do it, but just seeing this littler guy, the littlest guy in your entire company coming in there and doing it would be just so much fun.
It's just, you know, like part of the Dana White thought process and what he was selling before Mayweather-McGregor was, hey, why shouldn't McGregor have a chance? He's younger, he's stronger, he's in his prime. You're getting the exact opposite when you're going the other way. It just doesn't even make sense because unless they do something drastic where they're basically making something like that, which again, I still wouldn't give Mayweather much of a chance in that fight. But if they're doing something like that, okay, they're trying to bring it together a little bit. But a 40-year-old boxer, it doesn't work. We've seen it. MMA is where delusions die, man. And I don't care if you're Mayweather or whatever it is. It's like you come over, it's not going to happen. It might work for one time just as a novelty effect, but the fact that we just did it, I don't know. It rubs me the wrong way that we have to still be talking about it, to be honest. Like after all this time, this whole year, you know.
We did promise to not talk about it for too long.
I know. And I have an internal clock that we're running up against. So let me just make this point. This is the thing that shocks me about not shocks me, but in review, we're now headed into 2018 in just a matter of days, quite literally. And it is shocking to me how much Floyd Mayweather has dominated MMA headlines this year. We're at the end of the year. Now, the good news is we're going to end with UFC 219, which we're also going to talk about on today's show. But I think if you had told me at the beginning of the year UFC is going to have a down year, I'd be like, yeah, okay, all right, that makes sense. And if someone told me maybe Conor McGregor probably has more headlines than anyone else in MMA, but number 2 might just be Floyd Mayweather. Right. I am ready to pivot away from that.
See, that's where my objection is. You were talking about being, upset about the announcement that this was in the works, and didn't bother me. That I don't really care if Floyd Mayweather came over and fought. The problem I would have, being selfish, is that I have to sit here and talk about it. Like if every single week on the beat, if they said, okay, we're going to have this fight in May, whoever he was going to be fighting, you know that pretty much every single week from January through May, we would have to sit here and talk about it.
We would milk that for views.
And it would be just horrible to have to sit and talk about. So that's the part of it that bothers me. I really don't care. Like if he just made some surprise appearance and showed up one night and got in the octagon and did his thing, I really don't care. It really doesn't bother me at all, but I just don't want to talk about it.
The last thing on this, and we'll absolutely pivot away. Last thing, I swear to God.
No, I said I don't want to talk about it.
So then here's also was kind of surprising to me was that a day basically after the news broke that this was a thing, Mayweather comes out and is like, no, it's not a thing. Okay, here's what I'm asking you, Chuck. Why was he so quick with that? A guy who likes to milk things and be in the media and have his name out there. I understand he was trying to set the record straight, so I guess I appreciate that on some level. Yeah. But Dana White ended up looking rather bad out of this whole exchange, which I'm sure he doesn't mind either. But why was he so quick to?
I don't know. To be honest, that was what caught me off too. Is people were still talking about or just get warm in their idea to the idea of what Dana was saying, just to have a shot down that fast. I'm guessing that he was just it was, kind of bothering him that there was a misconception out there. But the bottom line is we know that Floyd is a pretty masterful salesman himself. I don't know what, if you're looking at for a subtext or things like that, he was dropping some numbers and he was still saying a lot without saying a lot. You know what I mean? So who knows? But the bottom line is I was kind of glad that he did that because I didn't want it to become a thing, to be honest. When Dana's saying it, and you're like, I know that we all have come to understand that when Dana says something, you're probably not getting the whole story, or you're probably not getting the whole truth. I know you've been hook, line, and sinker a lot.
Is there no Santa Claus? What?
So, I mean, I was a little. I guess I was a little bit like, okay, good. Right, at least it's being counted.
If Floyd did not say that, we would probably be devoting 75% of the show to all the permutations of this.
Floyd.
So I would like to exactly.
Big ups to Floyd Mayweather, I guess. Here's what I'll say: I'm not a religious person. I don't know what happens after you die, but if there is a God, this will be the last time we talk about Floyd Mayweather on this show, if there is one. So I guess we're going to find out. Now, let us pivot away from all of that and let's get to some MMA stuff, shall we? This past weekend, Rafael dos Anjos. What do you say about this guy? Chuck, I will throw this one to you. I'll be honest, when he moved up a weight class, I said to myself, I expect him to do reasonably well, and you never really know in MMA, but for him to come out and beat the former Strikeforce welterweight champ, to absolutely bulldoze Neil Magny, and yes, there are some mitigating circumstances with Lawler's knee injury. I know the Lawler truthers think that's the most important thing about that fight. It is a factor that matters. But nevertheless, you cannot say RDA looked anything but good. How surprised are you by his success?
Pretty surprised because I didn't look at it this way going into this last fight, but I always looked at Lawler as the bigger enigma in the sport because basically we've seen him almost disinterested to points where he lost some fights he probably should have won. You kind of thought that he was done, even going back to Strikeforce, losing some of those fights, and you think, well, it was fun. Robbie's been fun. He's been around for a long time. Only to resurrect himself, become a champion, and to be in the kind of fights he was just there. So that's very enigmatic and a crazy career trajectory. But if you look at Rafael dos Anjos, it's even crazier because this is a guy out of the gate for the UFC. He was very pedestrian. He lost his first couple of fights, got his jaw busted up against Clay Guida in Oakland. There's been so many intervals where I've been like, well, it was kind of fun to watch this guy for a minute, but he's already on his downward trajectory, only to bounce back, win the belt, and then lose a couple of fights, go up to welterweight, and here we are now, he's back in contention. It's just one of those careers where you're just like, each time you think you got a beat on him to what he's doing or a trajectory or where he's going, he just does the reverse, and usually it's in some kind of wow factor where he's coming up the ranks where he's doing this. And that was my impression. I wasn't sure what would happen. I knew certainly he could beat Lawler, but maybe not quite like he did. I was like, at first, I know we talked about this a little bit last week, but I was like, hey, man, if you're trying to make a case for a title shot, I think he did a pretty good job.
Yeah, I was kind of stunned. I was actually not covering the fights that night, so I was out at a party, and every once in a while I would sneak off to find a TV and watch a little bit of fights. But I timed it wrong, so I missed the beginning of this fight. Mm-hmm. But I look on Twitter, and I'm seeing people talking about how Lawler is hitting him, and that, I think I saw someone tweet something about how RDA was taking a lot of shots. And I'm thinking the worst of this fight. I finally tune in, and what I see when I tune in is RDA is backing him up. And I'm thinking that's not what I was expecting to see based upon whatever happened in the first round, which I missed. And for the whole rest of the fight, which I did watch, it was Lawler's always dangerous. And there was never a moment where I thought he is not a danger. Although toward the end, I was like, he wasn't firing back anymore as much. And
he looked defeated in that fifth round.
Yeah, exactly.
He was. It is fair to note he was pretty beat up and injured at that point.
Yeah.
I don't read into that fifth round a ton, but I made this point to everyone who said that's the most important thing. He didn't really tweak his knee, that back knee, until the end of the third. Mm-hmm. There is a moment in I think the first or second, where RDA actually kicks the back leg. You don't really know what kind of impact that had. Sometimes it's the craziest things. And here's my point. He was winning up until that point anyway. Yes, Lawler is resilient. I'm merely pointing out, I believe that there's a strong case to make that RDA is overperforming a lot of people's expectations at 170.
Yeah, I was kind of stunned. I really, just watching that,
People didn't see him at 155 either. They just didn't see him getting to those heights. So it's a weird thing.
This is the point about that sort of occurred to me back in the day when we first started watching MMA in the Spike TV era. What you noticed was that, and even prior to that, even a little bit after that too, it would be like, hey, here comes this wrestler who was this Olympic wrestler. How's he going to do? Or here comes this jiu-jitsu world champion. And you had a sense of like who the guys or the ladies were that were going to be the next big thing. And then there were people like John Jones who from basically the word go were just smashing people. We have to sort of wrap our heads around the fact that that's not necessarily the case for people anymore. They can start out as relatively mediocre and then over time get better. Look at Demetrius Johnson. Yes, he was fighting out of his weight class, but he didn't like set the world on fire at first. It was when his skill set matured way down the line. Then he became good. It's actually sort of humbling for us as analysts to say, you can never tell who's going to be really good in the end.
And also RDA, can compete both, in all the different realms of MMA. I mean, I think he even said it. He was talking about a potential shot against Tyron Woodley, and he was saying, well, Woodley in his last fight, all he had to worry about was Maya getting him onto the mat. Mm-hmm. And then before that, all he had to worry about was Wonder Boy, lighting him up on the feet. And it was kind of like he was fighting two specialists. He goes, against me, he's got to worry about everything. Yeah. And that's kind of the truth. I mean, if it goes down to the mat, RDA is a top guy.
He's filled into his frame.
And as a striker, he can handle himself.
I wondered when he first came, I was like, I know he's cutting a lot of weight to make 155, but you still think he may be on the smaller side of the welterweight. And, you could see that he's grown into that frame. I feel like he's just now coming into like feeling right at that weight class. So, look out, man. I mean, the guy who knew that he would be here. But I certainly have a bigger interest for those reasons in the Tyron Woodley fight than I did before.
Is there a big weight cutting lesson we can draw here?
I don't know, man. I mean, we saw, you know, Cerrone, for instance, come up, and I know he cuts a lot of weight too, but he comes up and he had a lot of success at welterweight. I feel like we're seeing a couple of these stories now, and I think if nothing else, it points to, hey, it's not the end of the world if you just can't make the weight you want. You know, like maybe it's time to actually look at it and say, you know, welterweight's easier for me to do, and I'm not losing anything. I know some people, they obviously there's a lot more power in each division you go up, but depleting yourself before a fight, you know, it's just, I can't imagine, I would have to imagine the risk reward of going against somebody's power versus your body shutting down and trying to recover in time for a fight. The risk reward is probably you want to go up against the power. You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. I mean, just think about how much more you have in your own sort of gas tank. You know, your resilience, your ability to move, your ability to sustain whatever comes at you. I would think that if you have not had to have a big weight cut, you're going to have a little more resilience. It just seems normal. I mean, just any of us, if you ever, you know, have a day where you're unable to eat very much or whatever, you just feel weak. And just imagine that to the nth power for these fighters who have to cut themselves down to a skeletal version of themselves, and then they get one day to kind of rehydrate. That's not really enough to really, maybe your body fills out, but I don't think it really brings everything back.
Let me play devil's advocate, if I may, with you, Jeff. You can say, wow, look at RDA. Like when he was facing off with Lawler, they looked roughly equivalent in size. That is not the dynamic you get with Johnny Hendricks at middleweight. It's not the dynamic you get with Kelvin Gastelum. Kelvin Gastelum's had a little bit of challenge there, but has done pretty well. Obviously, Hendricks is a bit of a different case. My only point being is they're just moving up 15 pounds as well. So why is there this discrepancy between the kind of success RDA and Don Cerrone are having versus the Gastelums? And he's doing well at middleweight, but it just never seems ideal for him.
I mean, I guess, I guess everybody's a little bit different. I mean, some people manage to, well, you know, Hendricks, in his case, he's been weight cutting his whole life as a wrestler. So I know it's not easy for him, but when he must have an ability to replenish his body in a way that makes him strong and able to perform at a higher level at that lower weight class. And once he gets up to a higher weight class, he doesn't have what it takes. Doesn't have the whatever it is. And it also seems like he even struggles to cut weight to that class. So it's almost like it wasn't like it was that much easier for him to cut to middleweight than it was for him to cut to welterweight. He always seemed to have troubles no matter where he was trying to cut. So therefore he was depleting himself in both cases. But in the latter case, once he started fighting as middleweights, he was fighting as bigger guys. So in a way that kind of, when you do the math there, it doesn't really add up very well for him.
He is ranked second currently in the division. Is that a fair ranking for him?
I think so. I mean, you know, that division is so stacked. It's a lot of fun because I think you were talking about this a little bit. There's so many new guys now. There's this influx of other guys who come up this year really to join the guys that are kind of the staples, and some of them are bypassing and stuff. So you've got like a nice little, if you're a matchmaker right now, you have a lot of good options, a lot of fresh matchups. And honestly, the only monkey wrench in the whole thing is GSP, right? Like if GSP wants to come back and he wants to fight for the belt, and it meshes somehow with Woodley's time frame for coming back from his surgery, I feel like that still has to be a priority. I don't know if the UFC will see it this way, but you're talking about your longtime kingpin against your current champion. To me, that's the biggest fight, other than maybe McGregor against GSP for GSP. That's the biggest one because that's his home, you know. And I feel like that. But short of that, I feel like if that's not going to be the case, it should be RDA next. I think he made that case pretty well.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think the other potential monkey wrench is Wonderboy. I mean, you could flip-flop between RDA and Wonderboy in terms of who would be deserving of that number 2 spot, but Wonderboy had 2 shots at the champion and didn't come away with the belt. So he's not going to get another chance anytime soon, yet he's also still sitting there. So other guys are going to probably have to get through him in order to get to the champion.
True or false? We're not going to do our awards today. That'll be again the next episode anyway. But true or false? Rafael dos Anjos deserves to be included on anybody's list for a potential fighter of the year.
Ooh.
True or false?
Let me think.
We're merely asking whether he deserves to be nominated for such an award.
I would think so. Yeah, I mean, you look at, you just look at how many people in those types of spots, how often they fought, who they fought. There's not a lot of people that jump out at you. So I would definitely say just given, just given like the kind of low expectations maybe or no expectations for what he might accomplish, I would say so.
Yeah, I would agree. I don't know that he's the guy that I would end up picking in the end, but he certainly would be somebody in the conversation, somebody I would think about.
All right, so that takes us, I forget which one of you brought it up about I think it was you, Chuck, about the other guys in the division. I was going to memorize this list, but I slept 2 hours last night. I can barely think 5 seconds ahead. But here are the rankings, top 10. Whatever the rankings are worth.
Cool.
You know what's so funny about the rankings? We always say, whatever the rankings are worth, they're not worth much. It doesn't matter. Like, we used to have these debates about how can somebody be ranked at 7? This is an injustice, one direction or the other. And now we're like, we don't even care. What number are you?
Yeah.
It's kind of funny how
it's more just a reference to see all the names together.
Yeah, it's just what place you're at, and that's the only thing that apparently that matters anymore. But here's the rankings as it stands today. Number 1, contender, Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. 2 is RDA. 3, Colby Covington. 4, Lawler. 5, Maia. 6, Jorge Masvidal. 7, Darren Till. 8, Carlos Condit. 9, Santiago Ponzinibbio. And then 10, Donald Cerrone. Kamaru Usman hanging out at 11 spot. Okay.
That's a pretty nice 11.
That is a great 11. 12 is Neil Magny. I mean, this is insane.
That is crazy.
There is a lot of upheaval, I think, that's about to hit welterweight. You've got those 4 in the middle. You got 3 in the middle. You've got Maia, Lawler, and I forget what the other one was, right in the center there, who are all under more Jorge Masvidal, coming off of losses. What are you going to do with them? Then you've got Colby Covington at the top. Right. All right, so let's start sorting this out. Yeah. Who should RDA fight next? Who should Colby Covington fight next?
Well, for Colby Covington, that's a toughie because I feel like he kind of was not quite in the pole position for that title shot, but I think there was a little bit of there were people behind it saying like, hey, he's a little bit incendiary. Maybe you put him in there because I think these things matter. Darren Till coming up the way he's been coming up, these things, they start to matter because you're paying attention to them. So, again, it's like a momentum trajectory and you think like maybe this works. To me, for Colby Covington, well, I'd like to see, first of all, Darren Till against Wonderboy, because I feel like just the style matchup and Till just looking like that's the exact kind of, that's a big leap to where he would be fighting. But to me, that's, if you want to put him in contention and get him right in that space, what a great fight that would be.
Is that already made or is it just rumored? I keep hearing
rumored.
About it.
We thought it was made and then it was not.
Well, Wonderboy's now lobbying to get his shot with RDA, which to me is like, that doesn't really make that much sense. You look at some of those other guys like Robbie Lawler. I'd like to see him fight a guy like Mike Perry, just because they were on the same night, depending on the extent of how long he's going to be out and all that stuff. There's some good matchups like that. For Covington, I don't know. He's tough because I feel like he wants to be right there. So you'd have to put him then in a situation where he's fighting a guy who's right there at the top. You know what I mean?
Or below him. It seems like the only guys that are above him are. Who did you have listed? It was Wonderboy and RDA, right?
It.
Maybe Ponzinibbio.
And, of course, the champion.
You could do a guy like Ponzinibbio because he's fresh. You know what I mean? Like, you could put those two guys together. Honestly, man, this is one of those rare moments where you can mix and match so many of those names, and they all look good, just given the new guys that are coming up.
I know Usman has been talking about...
He's going to be fighting Emil Mech at the UFC St. Louis, I believe. Yeah. They rebooked it there.
And Mech, too, another guy, like, if he gets by him, all of a sudden you got his name in that.
And, of course, you can't forget about Neil Magny fighting Carlos Condit. That's going to be at UFC 219. We'll talk about that later. But let me pitch to you an idea, Jeff. What do you think about this one? I always think you got to match up guys when they're not like when they... A lot of times we just match up guys who fight in close proximity. So if one guy fights on one week, another guy fights another week, we say, let's put them together. It's not exactly what I mean. I mean, the guys who are making some noise in the division. I could honestly go with, and I know they probably won't make this, but I'm thinking out loud, Colby Covington, RDA. Or how about Darren Till, RDA? I feel like either of those, for very different reasons, would be tremendous. RDA taking on a wrestler like Colby Covington, God only knows how he would probably say incredibly inconsiderate things, which would, I think, heighten the atmosphere.
He already has.
Then versus Till, it would be an incredible contest of skills. What, are those ideas appealing to you?
Sure. I think you almost could put any of those two together. You also could, throw Covington against Till. That was not one I think you threw in there, right? But
you could do Covington versus Till. Yeah, you could.
And that's two guys who are kind of,
very different skill sets.
Rising up as opposed to RDA.
That'd be the least option for me. Only in the sense that both guys are in the same kind of spot where there are the intrigues coming up. You'd rather see them go against the older guard, the guys who've been around.
I agree with that, except for I also feel like RDA has earned his title shot, and I know that Woodley is recovering from surgery, but RDA has already said that he would you know, he would take a little break for that shot. Now, and he was also promised it. And as we know, when you're promised a title shot in the UFC, that's an ironclad promise, isn't that correct? It's always. So I like to see that. And I agree with you. There is that little bit of you don't want to kill off one of the contenders, but I don't know. I mean, those guys would be a kind of a fun scrap.
We'll talk about the storyline a little bit later in today's show, but we've got Neil Magny, Carlos Condit coming up. So, Chuck, if Carlos Condit wins, and let's say he wins emphatically, what do you do with him?
Again, I mean, here you have a guy who was so close, so close. In fact, he probably should have been the champion in that Lawler fight. You look back at some of those things, and then he had a pretty bad outing against Damian Maia, and you wonder to what form you're going to get of him. But let's say he goes in there looking like vintage Carlos Condit, and all of a sudden you feel like he's back. It just adds another dimension, man. I mean, and again,
at that point, you have to do either Condit Wonderboy or Condit Till.
I would agree with both of that. I mean, and can you imagine if he does go through Magny that way? Either one of those fights would really, really look good.
Yeah, definitely.
Where are you on that one? Which iteration of those would you prefer?
Boy, well,
it's a great problem to have.
I mean, maybe Wonder Boy. I mean, I think that's the thing with Wonder Boy. He is in that weird spot that if he gets a big victory, that would for anybody else would propel him into an immediate title shot. He's not going to get that immediate title shot. So it's almost as though Wonder Boy is in this odd position, like Joseph Benavidez was for quite a while in flyweight, and there's various other folks as well who are in that spot where they've lost to the champion on multiple occasions, or in Wonder Boy's case, he had a draw and a loss. Really close, good fights, but I don't think he's going to earn himself another belt, a shot at the belt with just one victory. Maybe him and Condit.
It's the point. Like we were at the end of 2017, and you look at that division, and you think, gosh, it's really complicated to figure out because Woodley obviously having surgery. So, but we don't know what they're going to do. But GSP looming, you're not sure what's going to happen there. RDA making his case. It's just there's always so much confusion to figure these things out. You know what I mean? It's good that they have all those options, but that's kind of what's going on in all three of those major divisions. Lightweight with Conor McGregor sort of not really on the, not really there. So you got things kind of operating asterisk behind it. And then you got 185 where it's had like a lot of confusion at the top. So I feel like it'd be nice in the new year if these things could start to be simplified somewhat. That's really what I hope happens, because I really don't like the hard math at the top of each division and the theoreticals that have to go with every single thing, because there's one guy holding out, one guy who's the champ who's doing something. You know what I mean? So let's hope in 2018 some of that stuff starts to be simplified.
In a way, I guess I might disagree a little bit with that. And then I think that these questions you're asking are all, they're all thought-provoking, and each of the three of us could have a very different solution for how to shake it out. But I think that's kind of the sport at its best. When you've got, say, 7 or 8 real, any one of those people could theoretically be standing across the octagon from Tyron Woodley within 6 months. And that's kind of a that's a good problem to have.
That part of it is. But some of the other confusions, I mean, but that is a better problem. It's more fun to dissect what's happening at 170 than it is, for instance, what's been going on at 185, which we've been talking about once Bisping was there and he's fighting these guys. It's just that sort of confusion, it just makes each one of them complicated. But I agree, the welterweight division actually is a fun discussion while they sort this stuff out.
Yeah, but he's now Bisping's, GSP, the champion, is no longer the champion.
Right.
So they now have kind of restored order in that division. Yeah. And then when you go down to lightweight, I think that it's pretty, I think it would be, I'd be really shocked if this didn't happen. But if McGregor's next fight isn't a defense of that belt, I would think that belt goes away and somebody, a person who wants to be champion, gets a shot at it, and that division would be the order would be restored. So I think it's a good problem to have for all three.
What about Wonder Boy? Because this is an interesting one. I know there's been some calls for like an interim title shot. Which here's the scary part about that: shoulder surgeries can take a long time to heal from. # Cain Velasquez. I don't know. People are like, well, there's no point in doing interim title. Yeah, not right now, but let's see where we are in 9 months. But let's worry about that later. On staff, we have a guy named Jed Meshew. Mm-hmm. He is a malcontent and a dweeb. However, he had a really interesting idea on Twitter either today or yesterday. He was saying, if you're Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, you're ranked #1. But I think we would all agree, no one is clamoring for a title shot. That's a tough position to be in. But you hold a winner over the current middleweight champion. why not try and jump up and test your fortunes at another weight class, at least temporarily, while things sort themselves out at welterweight? You might actually end up getting a title shot relatively quickly at middleweight. Chuck, what about Jed's idea?
I don't know, man. I don't know.
No? You don't think that's a good idea?
I'm all for, like, honestly, like, in a situation with Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, I understand where he's at because he doesn't control his own destiny ultimately. He has to then, it's like the old playoff scenarios in football, like, well, if this team wins and this team wins, we sneak in the back door. It's almost like that. Somebody's going to have to beat Tyron Woodley probably for him to get back into a title shot. And the bottom line is, if Woodley is out until halfway through 2018 or something, that's a long time to wait. So I'm all for guys in that situation where they're just, it's all about if they want the best fights or they want to have a title chance to find it where they can get it. And I feel like if that's what he came down to and he thought he could do that, I'd be all for it, man. I feel like we didn't see his best. Honestly, we saw those fights were really intriguing in their own way, but we didn't see him flourishing in the way that he wants to. So I feel like it took some of the role off him. But if you remember some of his previous bouts, the way he dismantled guys using
the way he got the title shots.
The way he got it. Right. I mean, you want to be able to see that again, and wherever he feels he can showcase that again and really get the people buzzing about him again, he should do it.
Yeah, I mean, we talked earlier about weight cuts and how guys don't necessarily have to cut all the weight that they want to cut and maybe fight it at one division higher. I don't think that's the case with Wonderboy. I think Wonderboy seems to get to 170 pounds comfortably by all appearances. And so the only reason to move up a weight class would be to try to get that title shot. And I don't know that that's, I mean, I can't speak for him. Maybe it's for him, that's what's important. But I do feel as though if he continues to do what he's doing in the weight class he's in, eventually they have to give him another shot. I mean, first of all, if Woodley's no longer the champion, then Wonderboy can end up being first in line. And if Woodley does remain champion for a while, well, that means that Wonderboy wins one or two more fights. And if he does it in a convincing fashion against some of those other people that we've been talking about, you got to give him another shot.
Wonderboy reversed his fortunes against Masvidal, so he had a really nice win there. So if you're in the pole position, I guess, why would you jump? Here's what I would say if I was advising him. Look, if things start going south, or they just keep making you fight number 7, number 2, number 5, and you could pick up a couple wins, but you lose one. Maybe at that juncture, you then decide, hey, maybe some fortunes at middleweight can pick me up.
Right.
But he is in a tough spot because you're number 1 and doesn't matter. It's almost irrelevant in that context. I want to jump topics here just a little bit. We referenced the weight cutting with RDA. Let's talk a little bit about weight cutting because I saw something interesting on social media this week. Mike Dolce had a tweet about it that got shared around a lot where he was talking, or he at least was suggesting possible ways to curb weight cutting problems because we saw, weight cutting has been a huge issue this year, but even at Winnipeg, you had Josh Emmett. Yes, he was coming in on very late notice, but he missed weight by 2.5 pounds. Yes, yeah, that's right, 148.5. And then you had Pietro Manga, I believe, who was halfway to another weight class and couldn't even get close. They ended up being very different situations. Ricardo Lamas took the fight against Emmett and then got brutally KO'd. And then in the other context, you have the fight that just completely fell through because Tim Elliott doesn't want to fight a guy who's halfway to another weight class when he had to drain himself to get down there. All right, so I don't want to go into the specifics of Mike Dolce's suggestion. You can debate those merits with him at a different time. But I am seeing a little bit of more clamoring for the UFC or somebody out there to do something in a punitive way to stop or at least curb weight cutting. Here is the sort of revelation I came to about this. How do you make a rule to inhibit weight cutting if you're scared the rule will work? Because here's what would happen. You're saying, oh, if you do this, we'll do X, something terrible to get you to make the weight. Now you've taken that biological and health risk where I'm not under the punitive, the 50% fine of my purse, whatever it might end up being. But now I've made this, incredibly poor decision for my health. So if that's the case, Chuck.
Yeah.
What on earth are we supposed to do?
That's a toughie, man. And I did see Saul Dolce's, and you think if they do this, you're going to have people probably monitoring themselves earlier in the process, maybe. I mean, I don't think too many people would want to put themselves in a situation where they're trying to, lose 20 pounds in that last bit of time. But at the same time, man, imagine if you know that you're going to be suspended for 6 months or a year or something like that. Mm-hmm. That to me, and so this is urging you to kill yourself at that point. They're urging you to like do something ridiculous that maybe you say, hey, I'm throwing in the towel on this before I do damage to myself. It may take you past that threshold, and that's certainly not what you want to see in the sport, because I feel like if there's going to be a black mark on the sport, and I'm talking specifically about the UFC, it'll be something weight related. I feel like they've got everything else solved. You never know about accidents can happen within the cage, but like I feel like this is the one area where there's a danger zone each time we go into a fight week. You don't know who it's going to happen against. You kind of know some of these guys, but I don't know if it can't be as severe. I feel like there should be one. It should be like you should have if you show a weight problem once, so you can't do it. I think that the next time there should be something in place, basically urging them to fight in a different weight class. I don't know, but like there's got to be something. You can't just on the very first one say like, hey, you missed your weight. And this is now you're suspended. You can't do something that drastic on the first one. But the repeat offenders, it's for their own good that you basically urge them to either fight at another weight class, or you have to put some kind of punitive, something that will speak to them where they get earlier into their weight cut. Because whenever they sign that contract, they obviously believe they're going to make that weight. Well, what you don't want is when their brain cells are dying and everything's going on in their weight cut, that they take themselves past that threshold.
Yeah, I mean, this is another one of those cases where I'm more into recreating the structure of making weight as opposed to some sort of increase in the punitive aspect of it afterward. And in all respect to Mike Dolce, but his business is predicated on people making weight. So it seemed to me that his suggestions.
I think his suggestions were in good faith. I don't agree with his suggestions, but I don't.
There was certainly a self-serving aspect of it that, hey, come to me and I'll get you down there safely, which, I believe. Look, he believes in what he believes, which is cool. But, if the UFC or really MMA promotions in general were to put into place some measure where you had to be at a certain place a week before the fight and 3 days and had sort of a little bit more incremental weight loss, I think we would see some more things being, we would see some advances in this. I think that the problem is, these guys, it's not just that they're cutting weight to get down to 155 or 170, but they're doing it all at once in some cases. And the people who don't make a smart cut early on are just killing themselves to get down there right under the wire. And if you give them a 6 month if you're threatening them with a 6 month or a 1 year suspension and a huge fine, well, they're just going to continue to kill themselves. So I would be more in favor of restructuring the whole process of weight cutting.
Should the UFC, Jeff, be more proactive with setting up catch weights when on the Tuesday when fighters come into fight week, they know where they're at, and you could test their hydration then too? If they're not even close, should the UFC be more proactive about saying, this is not going to happen, we're not going to let you even try, we're going to make a catch weight, and then find a way to sweeten the pot for all the parties involved?
Yeah, well, I think the only party that has to be sweetened is the person who's losing out on the opportunity to advance within the lightweight or welterweight division. The person, I think it's in good faith that a guy who misses weight surrenders 20% of the purse.
30% in the case of Josh Emmett.
Yeah, well, so that's a good thing. I mean, you are impeding somebody else's ability to make a living at that weight class, the agreed upon weight class. But yeah, I think that for safety, there should be some proactive measures being taken that will allow fights to go on, but they're not to be, kind of these ghoulish, two skeletons going against each other. I think that would be a better thing.
It's kind of like the Bellator model, right? Because basically, it's whatever the contracted weight is. I think was it Michael McDonald? This last one wasn't going to make weight. Oh, it's a catch weight. It's always been a catch weight. That type of thing.
I know. Catch weight is like the Bellator secret sauce. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So I wouldn't want to go down that road. But people were asking me why can't they just do more catch weights? If what it means is you actually get all the fights that were scheduled to happen. I don't know what the answer to that is. The other sort of component here is we talked a little bit about it last week, but Tim Elliott. Refusing the fight and sort of being under, what do you want to call it, attack, essentially, from portions of the fan base. So then I'll pitch this to you. Last thing on this weight cutting, Chuck. What should fighters do realistically? Because we're all like, they should put things in their contract. But that, I mean, maybe Conor can do that, but I don't know if Tim Elliott can do that. But realistically, like, what should be happening if this is the supposition? Guy shows up, makes weight, does everything he's supposed to, no issue, opponent fails. What is that fighter owed? He's at least owed his show money. It's one of those things, like, I don't remember. He's not owed his win money? I don't know. See, that's the hard part for me, because that's a UFC thing that I feel like you keep mentioning good faith. I feel like the UFC, just like Ariel always talks about, the money is allotted. They already know what they're spending. They know who's getting this stuff. So if a guy does everything by the book and the other guy messes it up for him, that is not his fault. That is not the man who went through the process and getting there. So in some ways, you're like, that win money was already going to be accounted for. He should just get all of it because he showed up and he was going to do it the right way. That's an easy way for me to look at it. It's an easy way for fans to understand it. But at the same time, obviously, it's a little more complicated, I guess, when you're running a business to just say, like, hey, we're going to give you guys, we're going to give you the win money even though you didn't end up fighting. You know what I mean? But in my mind, there should be something there. Because Elliott was right, you know, in this situation to be like, I'm not going to, why fight? Somebody's like, yeah, but you get 20%. He's like, 20% or whatever it was, 20% of $10,000. No, thanks. You know, I mean, those situations, it's just ridiculous. And, you know, at that point, you don't owe anybody anything. You showed up and you did exactly what you're supposed to do.
Now, if a fighter goes out there and fights somebody who has missed weight, okay, you're guaranteed your show money. And if you win, you get your win money. Mm-hmm. And then on top of that, you get the 20% or 30% of the other. That's a good purse. But if you choose not to fight, I think you should get the win money. What you lose out on is the opportunity to perform and the opportunity to perhaps advance your career and go up the ladder. And, you know, maybe you don't get something from the other fighter's purse because the other fighter doesn't have a purse. You choose that so you still win the maximum you would have won if the fight went off without a missed weight cut. So I think that a guy who goes there and makes weight should get the money. I mean, that's just the way it should be. But you're right. The fighters can't negotiate this stuff into their deals.
Obviously, the UFC is going to be upset when somebody says, "Hey, no thanks, I don't want to fight," even though it's only whatever it was, 3 pounds. You're like, you know, the UFC would rather they just say, "Sure, I'll go ahead and take it," because they always talk about the guys who are like anywhere, anytime, and they love that type of mentality. But it's one of those things, man. The more it happens, I think the more people actually think about it, the more we will stop getting on to guys like Elliott for saying no thanks, because it makes sense, man. In your career, you know, it makes sense to manage it the right way. And if you want to have any longevity in the sport and everything else, I mean, look at Ricardo, the same card, Ricardo Lamas. I mean,
who had a better night, Ricardo Lamas or Tim Elliott?
Tim Elliott. Look at all he lost in that one moment. So
pretty crazy.
Yeah.
We don't have a whole lot of time left, so let's move this along. UFC 219 will be the very last, well, it won't be the last MMA event of the year, but for all intents and purposes, or what we can cover, it is basically the last MMA event of the year. I have to say, you look at the card, first of all, it's a great card, or at least a very good card anyway. Yeah. But what really stood out to me when I was looking at it the other day, I was like, my God, there's 1 billion storylines out of this one. So let's start at the end of the table and then work this way. I've got a few things on my mind, and it could be about the main event or any other fighter, but like, what's a storyline either under the radar or big in your face that people need to at least, if they're already considering it, maybe even take a fresh look at?
I mean, Holly Holm with a very specific piece of history that she can accomplish, because obviously, like, she already knocked off Ronda Rousey, which kind of changed. She's in almost exactly the same situation. People think she's going to lose. She's going against somebody who's been a monster in the cage. You know what I mean? And I feel like against Cyborg, so it's one of those situations. If she goes in there and does that, her legacy of just taking out the craziest, you know, at the height of their game, you know, these Rousey and Cyborg, it doesn't even almost matter that she lost some fights. I feel like all of a sudden we'll remember Holly Holm as like almost this legend who took out these two champs, you know, and also held the gold for those things. So that's a huge storyline. Not many people find themselves in a position to basically make a very specific kind of history like that. So I think that's the biggest one in my mind.
Yeah, that's a huge one. And the way you put it is so true. All she has to do is shine that one night. And all of a sudden, all the stuff that happened in between the night she knocked out Ronda till this fight, all that stuff, the ups and downs, they're invisible because it just is Ronda Cyborg. That's all it is. The one for me is right below that, and this Dagestani guy that we haven't seen very much. I hear he's pretty good. He's undefeated, but I think that Khabib Nurmagomedov has fought. I think he's fought twice in the last 4 years. Is that right? Or is it maybe 3 times in the last 4 years? But
Very rare.
But he, it's been over a year since he's been in there. But every time he's in there, whether he's whether he's had a long layoff or not, he performs, and so
and he performs in a way that I feel like people then all of a sudden get back on his bandwagon because he's always he's talking to people on while he's doing it, or he's always doing something.
The other part about it is he has a weird identity, and then I mean this absolutely as a compliment. He has a big mouth.
Yes, he does.
What I mean? He has a big mouth.
So it's like we kind of go dormant when he's not fighting, but as soon as he gets back in there, everybody remembers just how good this guy is.
He's also that rare guy who isn't much at all of a stand-up fighter. And he's also not really much of a submission fighter, but he could do the thing that most people who watch the sport kind of hate, take you down and just lay on top of you. But he's laying on top of you by beating the crap out of you. I mean, he's like the king of ground and pound. And that's a very small little section of the sport where people are really interested in watching that. They want to see Demi Amaya take you down and choke you out. They want to see, Wonder Boy Thompson, throw some head kick and knock you down. They don't. The guys who can wrestle, take you down, and not submit you. There's a very small level of interest, but he finds it because he is so devastating down there.
He certainly does. It'll be interesting to see what happens with him. I have a couple things I'm looking at. Number one, I have tried to get this guy to talk, and he has been very friendly in saying he doesn't want to talk. But it makes me all the more curious. Miles Jury is going to be back. He took all of 2016 off after a couple of losses and came back. They calling me. Came back at.
We'll wait.
No, yeah. Let me take this call. He came back and looked.
Miles Jury.
Yeah, it was Miles Jury being like, I'm ready to go. Came back and looked really good in his 2017 fight, I believe. And now he's taking on Rick Glenn. People don't know Rick Glenn. Yeah. He was a champion of World Series of Fighting. He left Rufus Sport. He's now with Team Alpha Male, and he looked tremendous in his last contest against Gavin Tucker. We're looking forward to see who's going to emerge from that sort of primordial soup of
Miles Jury has been an intrigue for a while.
Hasn't he?
Yeah, well, I mean, we were talking about, he had a nice little win streak, and I forget, was it Cowboy Cerrone?
Yes.
He ran into Cowboy Cerrone, and then it kind of went away, so he's kind of re-entering that space again.
Kind of changed his whole direction, too. It wasn't just that, it wasn't just it wasn't just a Cowboy sort of like was a brick wall that he couldn't go through. It was like it sort of diverted him into a place where he wasn't dominant anymore with anybody.
And we talked about before, sometimes these guys come out of nowhere, and they oh my God, they're really good. Rick Glenn, I'm telling you, people are sleeping on this guy. He is a tremendous talent. Will he be the next big thing? I guess we're going to find out. The one, though, I'm really paying attention to, Cynthia Calvillo, or Calvillo. Calvillo is a correct pronunciation, so to all the haters out there, I'm right. But in any case, people don't realize this. I said she was one of my, if she wins, and this is a big if, but if she beats Carla Esparza, the former champion, and I understand, not the most dominant champion in that weight class, but a champion nonetheless, if she beats her, that means she'll have had 5 fights in 2017, once in, I think, LFA, then 4 in the UFC, 2 of those on short notice, beating Joanne Calderwood, taking someone's back from a gator roll, which I don't think I've even seen before, and then you end the year in your 5th fight being the former champ. Ladies and gentlemen, if that's not a contender for Fight of the Year, I don't know who is. So that'd be really interesting to see.
Good point. It's funny because I feel like when she's fought the last couple times, I feel like there's been a nice little buzz with the media that's there. But
they brought her back. They brought her to the back just to talk to people at UFC 214.
Yeah.
So that'll be interesting.
So the quietest big year that you could have, you know.
You took someone's back with a gator roll. It's Grand Central Station today, I thought.
We don't talk about that.
Yes. Was it in or not in the bathroom? That's really the only key consideration here. Let's talk about something that happened this week that is, what do you want to say? It is so terribly sad. It is so terribly awful. Long time, they call him a trainer, but really something of a pioneer, to be quite honest. Trainer is a deeply insufficient title for this guy. Robert Follis passed away. He took his own life in a brutal way, which is I've said this before, if suicide affected my life, you always want to pay attention to the mechanism by which someone takes their own life. It tells you about the way they felt about themselves a little bit. And he did not go easy. And in any case, 48 years old, I mean, I'll be honest. Chuck, did you ever interview him?
Yeah, I've talked to him a lot.
So I'm going to go to you first, but I actually never did. And I want to get Ariel on the show because I know he's been on MMA Hour a number of times. Let me just say what I know about Robert Follis. Never met the guy. Obviously saw interviews with him. But it is rare that you don't hear any bad words about someone in MMA. It is a vile, cutthroat business, and everyone's got a bad word to say about everybody else. And one never came across my way about him. What did you know about Robert Follis?
I know that he was a very kind of quiet pillar in this sport for a long, long time. I mean, I know that, like, from talking to him, I've talked to him on numerous occasions through many different fighters, but basically, I know that, he went back as far as like UFC 29. He was in Monson's corner for the Liddell fight.
Wow.
And, that's in 2000. So for 17 years, he's been somebody's somebody's backbone. He's been somebody's conscience for a fight. And he was one of those guys. Each time I talked to him, and it wasn't a ton of times, but he helped Ed Herman. I remember talking to him about Ed Herman a couple of times. I talked to him about Misha Tate and Caraway when they were on the same card together at UFC 200, and there were just certain things like that. Just very giving of his time. And he didn't smite his own chest. I know some guys, some trainers these days especially, like to be part of the story. They like to put themselves out. I never felt like he was like that. I did feel like there was a sense, you drag it out of him though, that he felt underappreciated probably in the grand scheme, but he wasn't about to tell you that. He wanted you to discover that however you wanted to come about it. Just one of those guys, man, like very selfless, but a pillar in this game who, helped mold so many of the name brand fighters that we've come to know. I mean, it's always weird because I think he's part of that scaffolding.
Yeah, I'm kind of in your boat in that I haven't interviewed him. I mean, I've seen him at at events a couple times, and he's been speaking to a group of people, I think. But I also have seen online people saying very nice things about him. Now, people say nice things about you when you pass away, but it was a little bit more than that. It was a couple of other MMA trainers, just speaking of him in a very pure way. I mean, he was a guy, as you said, who didn't really seek that spotlight. I've talked to a lot of trainers for a lot of fighters, and I've written about Misha Tate, I've written about Kevin Lee, another one of his fighters, but never reached that beyond to get him. It's always, I've talked to guys like, Greg Jackson or John Kavanaugh or Duke Roufus. I mean, all these guys who are really the leading lights, Renzo Gracie, guys who are the leading lights as teachers in this sport. Not to say that they're seeking attention themselves, but they have, they'll say their piece. And this is a guy that I think is, for the most part, kind of, stayed in the background. And God, look what he created with Kevin Lee. I mean, Kevin Lee, of course, is a really good athlete, but he really looked like a refined mixed martial artist. And
I know, maybe 2010, I was putting together a list of top trainers, just, like for this little blurb piece I was doing. But it was like, I was talking on, and I remember I called him. I was like, hey, I want to include you in this piece. And I remember him being very much like, wow, you would really include me in the top trainers? That's what I'm like, that's the kind of guy he was. He just, I don't know if he saw himself, I don't know how he saw himself. But, you've talked to other fighters. I remember, Misha Tate has glowed about him. The times when he was very candid in his interviews. He would tell you the truth. You know what I mean? He was just one of those guys. I think he was just one of the good guys in the game, and very humble, honestly, for the type of thing that he was in, and he just liked to stay in. I think he enjoyed the background, but I think he would have been okay if people came to their own conclusion that he was one of those top guys.
And wasn't trying to sell himself or even his fighter. I mean, I think that a couple of interviews that I can remember, I think it might have been when Kevin Lee was going to be fighting Ferguson. He had some really honest words about Ferguson that was in the next opponent. And you see most of the time when you've got a trainer who's getting his fighter up for that next opponent, they're all talking about our game plan and what we're going to do and all this kind of stuff. But he really kind of could break down another guy and do it publicly in a very respectful way. So, rest in peace.
Well, what stood out to me about the whole thing, he had recently left Extreme Couture, but just prior to that departure, not only was he training guys, Misha Tate, of course, retired, but he was training the Misha Tates and the Kevin Lees and everybody else. And I mean, the list of fighters he's trained is endless, or at least had some, training experience with. But the fact that he was still out there teaching just regular old BJJ classes, putting on the gi, grip fighting with some white belt off the street just to show him, I cannot tell you how remarkable that is. That is incredibly rare. It's one
thing. You wonder how many more of those types will exist in the sport.
I mean, can you name anybody like
not
that?
Really.
I mean, maybe Ricardo Laborio when he was at ATT, but of course he's not with them anymore. that is, I mean, Marcelo Garcia, who is here in New York City, he does that. But of course, just in jiu-jitsu, like, I don't know, I mean, how much is, it's easier to corner someone in jiu-jitsu because, you know, you have like 4 or 5 students all at one tournament.
Right,
and
true.
Right? It's unbelievable that a guy in fight sports would do something like that. And the other component was, I had Misha Tate on my show, I spoke to her at least, and you look at Kevin Lee's social media posts and what Misha Tate told me, and what you get a clear sense of is that this guy wasn't just a guy who, you know, knew a lot about the game or was a kind, caring soul, but that he knew exactly what to tell fighters when they were at their lowest and the depths of despair, to pull them out, shake the dust off of them, and get them to believe in themselves again. Not tell them nice things to make them feel better necessarily, but you promote them, find a way to get them to believe in themselves, to promote themselves to greatness. I cannot tell you how rare that. I've heard a lot of good things about coaches. I have almost never heard that.
Yeah, I feel like his level of empathy, not just for his fighters, but his ability to understand, like, from our perspective, a media's function or what they were trying to get, he understood both sides. His level of empathy and his level of understanding was, you know, it kind of carried over to both sides. A
lot of empathy and not much publicity. I mean, I would guarantee that a lot of people, even the diehard fans, you know, who know all the big name trainers, probably didn't even know much about him. Maybe have heard his name, but he was not a guy who you go on the web, you're not going to see a ton of his interviews.
Yeah. It's always a reminder there are some good guys in the sport, and if the media doesn't do a good enough job promoting them, this is something that we probably should reflect in 2018. Like, who are the people out there making a difference that maybe don't make the headlines?
That's true.
Okay, so let's end on a lighter note. We're going to do I want to make clear about this, we're going to do our Fighter of the Year stuff all next 2018. Time. But we're going to do a Christmas theme here. We're going to try this out. We're going to do stocking stuffers. All right? So here's how this is going to work. In someone's stocking, what can you put? You can put a little gift, or you can put a lump of coal. I can assure you I've got charcoal briquettes at home filled up in mine, my friends. But I want to see if you guys either had a gift or a piece of coal you want to give to someone. If it's a gift, it's because they did a great job this year. If it's a piece of coal, it's to tell them to step it up in 2018. I will go first, my friends. Go ahead. I have both a present in the stocking stuffer and a lump of coal.
All right.
For the gift, I would give it to Paul Felder. What a revelation he has been this year. Successful in the octagon. I think when Brian Stan left, we were like, oh, my God, who is going to fill his shoes? I couldn't even think of somebody. And Paul Felder's his own guy. I don't mean to overly compare the two, but if I had to think of someone in that direct lineage, he comes to mind. So Paul Felder's had a standout 2017. He definitely deserves a stocking stuffer that's not a charcoal briquette. Now, conversely, this is going to be in 2018 the last year of the Fox deal. And I don't know if UFC is going to stay with Fox. I don't know if they're going to move on. But I'm going to give a piece of coal to Fox Sports. They often do a very good job. But your 6-hour main cards are affecting my life. Look at me now, Fox. It's affecting my marriage. It's affecting my sleep. It's affecting my ability to walk my dogs. You are ruining my life. Stop ruining my life. Make them shorter. Zip it up a little bit. And you can get a stocking stuffer that's a present next year. Jeff, you're good.
Fox robot just scratched his bill and burp.
Well,
you don't have to give both. You can just give one or the other.
You know, the gift and the lump of coal are, I'm going to go pretty literal because that is basically, comes down to being naughty or nice, right?
Right.
And so I am going to take that literally and say I'll give the gift for being nice to, like, Rose Namajunas, and I guess I'll go with Brian Ortega. They can split it because these are both people who, after really big victories, came out and spoke. You know, Rose talked about being a champion without trash talking and just competing. And Ortega, of course, you know, after his victory, he just did the same thing, talking about wanting to help kids. And I mean, it was just these are good citizens. I will give them a gift for being good citizens and using their time with the microphone, not to call out somebody or be trashing somebody or anything like that, but to show up as good citizens. You get a gift. Lump of coal, Colby Covington. I mean, you know, the guy.
Wow.
I was not sure I'm not even sure that I wanted to do this because I don't like to feed the monster. I don't like to feed that. I mean, I know this
you are.
And I am, but I'm just not interested in his brand of talk.
Okay, fair enough.
So for the little stocking stuffer gift, I would probably go to a guy who, as many times as he fights, and it's been a lot, it still goes largely unsung, and I would say Cowboy Cerrone. Only in the sense, like, he's fighting a guy like Darren Till, right, who's just this monster. He shows up anyway, and he fights this guy. He doesn't probably know anything about him, and he has to learn the hard way about Darren Till. And to me, that's just such a fighter's fighter, a guy that I love guys like that, the way he handles the fight game. At some point, you got to give him, you got to acknowledge you're just that guy in general, like just what he's contributed to the sport. But this year particularly, just, you know, kind of going through and fighting a guy like him. For the lump of coal, I don't know. I was thinking about Colby Covington as well, but I would almost go the guy he threw the boomerang at. I'd go with Fabricio Verdum. Yeah. Only in the sense, like, I feel like there's some ugliness with this guy that just keeps coming out in these new ways. And there's a part where you want him to handle himself a little better. And I feel like he's been in a good position as the champion to rise. And instead, I feel like he's only diminished over time, like, and not in his skill set so much, but just in his basic attitude and his actions. Yeah, and also still takes money from Ramzan Kadyrov. Well, that was the main crux of my. Not a good look. Yeah. Okay, so that does it for the MMA Beat. Let me give a stocking stuffer to all of you. Anybody who has watched this past year, whether you upvoted or downvoted or commented or just, you know, if you shared it, if you didn't, but if you at all watched this show this past year, I cannot tell you how much everyone here appreciates it, from the crew to Ariel to of course everyone here on the panel. We really thank you. I want to thank everyone in the back as well, the crew who helps make this happen, Vox Media, for allowing us to do this another year. It has been a crazy year and has been a fast year, I feel like, too. And look, the train's going to keep rolling in 2018, too. It's not slowing down at all. There's big doings that are coming up here. Even in the first quarter. Baby. Mayweather, babe. Can't wait for more Mayweather traffic. So thanks to everyone who is involved with this. We really, really appreciate it from the bottom of our hearts. This is honestly an incredibly fun job, and it's only possible because of people like you. So here's what we're going to do. The MMA Beat is going to end for 2017, but after the Beat, it continues. Look at the link below on the screen. We're going to end here momentarily, and we're going to pick up there, like, just seconds after. And we've been taking your questions and comments using the hashtag #TheMMABeat. We're going to read some of those live on the air. So close up shop with us here. Head over to Twitter at the link below, and we'll finish up with the very last After the Beat of 2017. For Chuck and Jeff, Ariel, and Abstentia, I'm Luke Thomas. We'll see you guys over on Twitter in just a minute.